This happened to me back in 2007. I was 9 years old and my brother was 14. My mom had sent us out of the house with about $30 to go to a movie and maybe get a bite to eat afterwards. After watching the movie, it was getting pretty dark and I was ready to go home. My brother wanted to get something to eat first and we agreed to walk to McDonald's, which was only a couple of blocks from the movie theater. On our way there, we were stopped and approached by a man. He had a friendly smile plastered on his face and he was holding his child's hand. There didn't seem to be anything off about him. He was average looking and seemed to be nothing more than a father having a day out with his son. "Hey, do you two think you could give my son and me a hand real quick?" he asked. "We need help loading a mattress onto the back of our truck. The truck is just up the road." "Sorry, but we don't really have the time," my brother said. It was at this time I noticed the little boy. He was about 8 years old and he looked abnormally thin. He had a blank expression on his face and wore clothes that were much too big for him. I turned my attention back to the man, who was now mumbling to my brother about how it would only take a second. My brother kindly declined again. Being the helpful kid that I was, I joined in with the man and tried to persuade my brother that we should help them out. I turned to my brother, who was now staring down at the little boy. My brother had a disturbed expression on his face as he looked down at the child. The child stared back at my brother blankly. I didn't understand why my brother had that look on his face. He grabbed my hand and said, "I think that's my mom over there." He pulled me and we began walking away from the man. I didn't understand what was going on and why my brother had just lied about our mom being over there. He didn't let go of my hand and practically dragged me until we were a far distance away from him and his son. I looked back and could still see the man holding his son's hand. Only now, he wasn't smiling anymore. He had a look of fury on his face and he yanked the little boy by the arm and they walked away. I pulled away from my brother's grasp and bombarded him with questions. He shushed me and pulled his phone out of his pocket. He dialed in a number and began pacing around nervously while talking on the phone. I remember the police showing up and my mom came soon after. She took me home, but my brother was left with the police. I asked my mother what was going on and she said the police were just questioning my brother because the man we had encountered was dangerous. That's all she told me and I went to bed. By the next morning, I had almost completely forgotten about the incident and things went back to normal. It wasn't until a few days ago that these memories flooded back into my mind. I decided to call my now 22-year-old brother to get some real answers. When I brought the ordeal back up to him, he finally gave me the information I wanted to know. And now that I know everything, I understand just how terrifying our encounter with the man truly was. My brother told me that while the man was constantly trying to convince us to come with him, he happened to look at the little boy. The little boy then looked at my brother with his eyes filled with terror and mouthed the words, "I'm not his son. Please help me." Then his expression went back to being completely blank, almost as if he had never said anything at all. This was why he'd become so freaked out and snatched me away. When he called the police, they hurried down and he described the man the best he could. They couldn't do much with the little information my brother had given because we hadn't even seen the car that the man supposedly had. My brother told me that a few weeks into the investigation, they had found the little boy who was with the man dead. His body had been cruelly dumped in the woods. The cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration. If my brother and I had gone with the sicko, we likely would have met the same fate. He obviously couldn't have kidnapped both of us on his own, as my brother was a fairly strong fellow. That meant he had other pedophile partners who would help him snatch up unsuspecting kids. Unfortunately, they were never able to catch any of the sick guys who did this to the child. But the man was definitely not his father. His real parents had already been searching for their missing son for almost a month. The pedophiles had managed to kidnap the poor kid and used him as their puppet to try and kidnap other children. Every time I think about the boy, I feel a deep pity for him. He was only a year younger than I was at the time, and I can only imagine how terrible it must be to slowly starve to death. This all started last summer, the summer of 2013. I had just turned 24, about a year out of graduate school, and was back living in California in my childhood home with my father and our dog. My days were mainly spent applying for jobs in the mornings, sending out my resume and cover letter online, and then heading over to a park for a vigorous workout in the afternoon. I found that keeping to this schedule was most productive for me. I live in an upper middle class area of a large city in an area with no sidewalks. Neighborhood walks or jogs were out of the question. I was pretty allergic to the grass at a really nice neighborhood park that is about a 5-minute drive from my house, so nearly daily I'd make the trek to a much larger park, which, although was a good 20 to 25 minutes away from my house, and in a slightly more questionable part of the city, provided a really nice jogging track and beautiful, peaceful scenery, including a man-made lake and various species of birds. I kept firm to this daily schedule during the weekdays, giving myself a break on weekends. Being that my visits were during the daytime on weekdays in the summer, the park was mainly inhabited by older senior citizens, mothers with young children, and middle and high school age kids on summer vacation. Although I usually visited the park around the same time each day, I never really picked up on seeing the same people there. The park was quite large, and I really liked how uncongested the jogging path around the man-made lake was. Also, even though the park was in a slightly less nice part of town, I never felt nervous or in danger. There were always enough normal people around, and I never went off into any desolate parts. As the daughter of a lawyer and the niece of a former FBI agent, I was always taught to be very aware of my surroundings and usually pick up on details or if things seem wrong or suspicious. I never felt this way on my workouts at the park. I kept to myself, worked out hard, and then left. On August 24th, which was a Saturday, I happened to be at home, browsing the missed connections section of Craigslist, which I do sometimes for a laugh when I'm bored. In the man for woman section, I saw a post entitled, "I have to tell the women I see walking," with the posted location as the exact city in which the park I walked at is located. I opened the post. It was rife with spelling and grammatical errors, but this person essentially described me, my workout clothing, my appearance, the basic description of the park, what time I'd come to the park, etc., down to details including the particular sunglasses and color sneakers I'd wear. He mentioned that he wanted to know more about me and felt a connection. As I said, I never noticed anyone in particular at the park, and certainly no one who had seemingly watched me. I was very, very creeped out, but also, I hate to admit, curious as to who this was and how he knew all of these details. The next step was clear. I was too curious. I created a throwaway Gmail account and replied to the stranger's post on Craigslist. Not expecting a response, I was surprised when one came in almost immediately. I asked him several questions, including the specific park to which he was referring and who he was. I was almost expecting this person to just be playing some sort of prank. He answered immediately. He was in fact referring to the park I visited, identified himself as Mike, and then did something so incredibly scary I couldn't believe it. He attached about 7 images that he had taken of me jogging and walking around this park, spanning from months earlier to just a few days previous. The pictures were classic stalker-style photos, sort of grainy and clearly taken by a cell phone. He asked, "Is this you?" I was starting to panic. I thought that I needed to play this cool. I watch a lot of true crime TV shows for fun and consider myself somewhat of an amateur sleuth, and I knew what I needed to do. I wanted to try to collect as much information as I could about this man and try to find out who he was without revealing too much about myself in the process. I never confirmed or denied that the images were of me, the person he was emailing, but pressed on as to who he was, what he looked like, etc. He described himself to me as a 33-year-old ex-military, about 6'1", in shape and fit, with short dark brown hair, olive skin, and some distinctive tattoos. He mentioned that he worked in an office building near the park and often took his dog there for walks on his lunch break. He continued that he was sure that he had caught my attention several times and that I would definitely recognize him if I saw him. He eerily stated, "And when I run, I slow down to look at you." I was trying to scan my brain to see if I had ever seen someone who matched that description, and I really could not remember anyone. Hoping nothing pornographic would come my way, I asked for a picture of his face. About 30 minutes later, I got 3. I opened up the images, and clearly, they were of 3 completely different men, none of them really matching the description of himself he had provided me. A quick Google reverse image search confirmed that he had sent me fake pictures and of 3 different men. 2 of them seemed randomly chosen, as if he had stolen photos off of Facebook or some other social networking site. But the other was, very alarmingly, a photo taken from an online memorial website of an ex-military man who had died under suspicious circumstances several years back. Now, I was agitated that this creep was playing games. I called him out on sending the fake photos, and he replied with his phone number, begging me to call him so that he could explain. I now had another piece of evidence on the creep. Full of both adrenaline and fear, I googled his phone number, which gave me his full name, address, and age. His name was in fact Mike, but he was 42, not 33, and lived with his mother. He lived fairly close to the park. I also searched for any prior arrests or evidence of criminal history, but to no avail. Being slightly too curious at this point, I decided that I would call him from my home number, which is blocked and would not show up on his cell phone. He picked up, and I could immediately tell that he was in fact much older than he initially claimed. I called him on this, and he denied it until he broke down and admitted that he was 40, but not 42. He said he didn't want to admit he was old. I then called him out on his fake photos. He first claimed the images were real and then insisted 2 of the photos were friends of his and the other was of his brother. He made up a complete story of the photo of his supposed brother, which I knew was also a fake story because his real last name, which I learned from the online records, and the name of the man who died under suspicious circumstances were not the same. Many other details didn't match up either. At my insistence, he finally emailed what he claimed to be a real image of himself. The man in the photo appeared older, portly, and what could only really be described as greasy and sleazy. This creep would not stop talking about himself, bragging about his cars, money, vacation houses, designer clothing, etc. Then, like a switch, he got really creepy. He started getting sexual, talking about how he loves watching women work out in tight spandex clothing and how he likes watching really young girls and women exercise. I don't exactly remember how, but I got off the phone and made up some excuse of why I couldn't text. I obviously didn't want him having my phone number. Before I hung up, he mentioned he was meeting some friends at a Mexican bar and restaurant that was somewhat close to the park I visited. At this point, I called up a close older male friend of mine, Bobby, who is a super intelligent professional lawyer, but also loves to joke around and is quite young at heart. He has always been a confident, true friend and almost an older brother to me. I told Bobby the whole story and he was just as freaked out as I was. Perhaps we were both too curious to figure out exactly who this creep was, but we hatched a plan to stake out this bar or restaurant, which was pretty close to Bobby's house, to see if Mike ever showed up. The area was heavily trafficked and we assumed the bar would be very busy on a Saturday night, so we weren't too worried. Since hanging up with Mike, he had made repeated attempts to engage in more conversation with me over email, although I didn't respond. The whole evening, I was creeped out but also curious. I drove to Bobby's house, left my car in his driveway, and Bobby drove us to the vicinity of the bar. The plan was for me to wait in the car, which was parked around the corner, while Bobby would casually go inside and order a drink and see if he saw Mike. I had previously shown Bobby the real photo that Mike had sent me earlier. I definitely did not want to go in, see Mike, and confirm to him that it was me, the girl who he had stalked and photographed for months, who he had found, spoken to on the phone, and now was seeing in person. So, bad idea or not, I stayed in the car and was in constant contact with Bobby, who was inside the Mexican restaurant. I was in such a jumpy state, trying to stay calm, my mind moving a million miles a second and compulsively checking my text. Maybe around 30 minutes later, Bobby left the restaurant and hopped into his car. He seemed very shaken and just not like himself. He insisted we drive around a little bit and not go back to his house right away. Bobby is always calm and level-headed, and it was unusual to see him like this. When we finally stopped killing time and driving around, we went back to his house and went into his newly redecorated TV den to talk so that we wouldn't wake his brother. This is when he told me the whole story. Bobby, as planned, had walked into the Mexican restaurant and got a seat at the bar. Surprisingly, it wasn't as crowded as expected and was starting to clear out. He said that what seemed to be a large birthday party was leaving, and he was told the kitchen was closing, and there were only a few patrons. Shortly after, he ordered a beer from the bartender. A single man came up and sat right next to him and immediately started making small talk. This was odd to me and the first red flag that this was Mike, because in the city where we live, strangers pretty much keep to themselves. It wasn't like this man was drunk and being super friendly either. Bobby said the man was completely sober and didn't even seem to be drinking or eating. Bobby told me that the man resembled the real photo that Mike had sent me over to email, almost like an aged, has-been actor or an older, out-of-shape former bodybuilder, and that this man then began gloating about his money, cars, houses, etc., just as Mike had done to me earlier on the phone. Bobby said that the conversation was completely one-sided, with him only managing to eke in a wow or oh really in an as enthusiastic as he could tone here and there. Then Bobby told me, like nothing, the man just started ranting and raving and getting very visibly angry over how he couldn't meet any decent women. Bobby's older brother, whom he lives with, and mother sadly suffer from mental illness. He has been around it his whole life and is pretty aware of it when he encounters it. He told me that the man was clearly very mentally ill, as he went on and on about how he watches women, but that things never get anywhere until he takes things into his own hands. Looking back, we both concluded that Mike was probably referring to coercing or forcing women into sexual relations with violence. I was completely sickened at this point and felt like I really dodged a bullet. Bobby, disgusted and having heard enough at this point, told me that he calmly acted like he was tired, paid for his beer, and got up from the bar stool to walk out back to his car and me. Then, Bobby told me the worst part that honestly still freaks me out to this day. As he was putting his wallet back into his jeans, Mike leaned in super close and told him point blank, and in what Bobby said was a calm yet somehow sneering tone, "You can tell your friend I'll be waiting for her at the park on Monday." Bobby had never ever mentioned me or any of the situation to Mike, and I had never mentioned any of my personal life, including my name, social networks, friends, or anything of the like to Mike. After this, I stopped going to that park and tried to forget about the whole incident. Mike had emailed me a fair amount for several weeks, alternating between seeming desperate, yelling at me, and being intensely sexual, and creepy and stalkerish. I never replied. I figured that he was truly mentally disturbed and would eventually leave me alone as long as I didn't provoke. I've dealt with some stalker situations before and really didn't feel like getting my dad involved and going through everything with the police, etc. Also, I didn't feel like Mike was too big of a threat. I mean, he did not have my real name, my real email address, any of my phone numbers, etc. I figured that as long as I avoided that park, I would be fine. Months went by and I stopped checking my fake email, started a new job, and pretty much forgot about him. I also got a new cell phone and a new cell phone number, completely unrelated to this Mike issue. I gave my new number out to only my dad and my new boss, and a handful of lifelong friends. I was very careful and more guarded than ever due to this incident. I also never picked up blocked or private numbers on my cell phone. Then, on November 26th, while at work, I got 5 calls on my phone in rapid succession from blocked numbers with 5 corresponding voicemails, followed immediately by a call from a number I didn't recognize, with no voicemail. I didn't like to check personal calls during the workday, especially from blocked or unrecognized numbers, and put it out of my mind for the time being. Later that night at home, I remembered the calls and played the voicemails. The content was extremely unsettling. The man on the phone repeated the lyrics to the song, "Me So Horny" by 2 Live Crew in various accents, said my name multiple times, and said some muffled things that sounded somewhat like threats and general sexual harassment. He also seemed to have great difficulty in hanging up the phone. Then I googled the phone number that called me immediately, literally a second or two later. Following the 5 blocked calls and voicemails, which I assumed was the same person, I stopped. Yup, it was Michael, or Mike as I had known him. I'm pretty sure he called 5 times, blocking his number and then accidentally called again, forgetting to block his number, and hung up once he realized his blunder. To conclude, I have no idea how he got my new cell phone number, my name, or anything. I can conclude that he may have picked up my name from listening in on a phone call of mine at the park months before. Seeing as he was insane and unstable enough to think photographing and stalking women in a public park was acceptable behavior, I wouldn't put listening into conversations or spying past him either. But how he got my cell number is completely unexplainable. We have no mutual friends, and as I said before, I took strong precautions and not revealing any of my personal information to him. I have since blocked his number. Nothing has happened since November, thankfully, so I finally felt a bit more comfortable in sharing this scary story. I hope I've not left out any details. I may have, as it has taken me a lot to sit down and write this whole thing out. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night, as my friends and I were quite the night owls. We loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths we frequented. Even when using the main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area, and you could see and hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peaceful silence of the night. We were really into it at the time and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, sometimes not arriving home until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favorite hidden routes. It began with a narrow paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and was extremely relaxing to ride through due to the scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue moving and turn into a very close path that leads directly into a densely wooded wilderness preservation. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what happened to be a tiny moving ball of dim light down there. It moved so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it was. Rather than shine our flashlight down, we curiously watched it for a few moments, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. All at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that had become accustomed to the dark and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off the path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill overlooking where we had just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers right up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers and 2 on full-size motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we couldn't make out what they were saying due to the distance we had covered. We felt safe enough to whisper very softly to each other and speculated who these people could be. Our first thought was maybe they were park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one here in the many times we had been through, and honestly, we doubted that this county had the budget or even the desire to have anyone patrol the deep woods at night. Besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for the paved bike trails, and they were very angry about something. They called out to us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're out there, and we can see you, come out." We stayed silent and decided to call their bluff instead of running. Eventually, we clearly heard one of the men yell, "Find them now," and smash a bottle. That had erased any hope we had that these were just park rangers. We watched them split up, each of them going a different way down the series of paths on their vehicles, including the path we came from. It took us what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in terror inside the dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travel through the woods and paths. One of them already coming full circle and passing the point he started from. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone in fear that even the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach their farthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and try to run somewhere far enough from these people to safely make a call. We ran as hard and as fast as we could through the woods. Since their headlights gave away their location on these paths, we would hide again whenever we felt they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear I felt waiting for one of them to drive past us, while basically only being covered in leaves and plants, may still be unmatched to this day. Finally, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of the 2 main roads. far from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. When I opened my phone, I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our other friends, Connor, who we were supposed to meet up with after our longboard excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him and was only a few miles away, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of the 2 streets we were near the corner of and explained that we needed picked up right away. He agreed to speed over to us while Justin and I waited in hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of those men did. We bolted in the back seats of his car, yelling for him to get out of there, and he took off. Relief doesn't begin to describe what I felt being safely driven home after everything I just experienced. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided to not call the police. We figured they'd be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting to breaking the law by taking those paths so late at night. I still have no idea what happened or who those people were. I've been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that have heard this story. Some think we walked right up to a huge drug deal. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the revving started and we couldn't see, our minds both went straight to chainsaw-wielding horror movie serial killer. So I suppose it could have been much worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever those men thought we saw that made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw. We'll never really know, I suppose.